Dr. Sen Narrainen, welcome to Conversations Live. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Before this interview, we have to get to know about you. We have to read about you. We have to do a bit of research. And looking at the data that we've gathered brings me to a point that I'm quite emotional to have you here today because of the history that we know about you and the work that you've done. I think the best way to summarize this is Mauritius has had 9 ministers of finance, and you've worked for 8 of them. In other words, you've written the budget speech for all of those guys. So clearly, Dr. Sen Narrainen, you must be a famous guy.
Well, maybe, I don't know. The first budget speech that I wrote was for in 1996 speech. After that, I wrote almost all the budget speeches. I don't say all of them, but almost all.
We're going to get into all those details. You know, when we refer to the economic miracle, what was that about?
I don't like the word miracle because only God makes miracle. I mean, people cannot make miracles. So it's pejorative in a sense, because if they say it's a miracle, it means you people couldn't have achieved it. It must have been achieved because of other circumstances. So I don't like that word, but nonetheless, I think that the performance of Mauritius, the way we've dealt with our problems before I arrived here, they have been quite remarkable, quite impressive. And when the World Bank says it was an economic miracle, they didn't mean it in a bad way. They meant it in the sense that Mauritius has achieved what is unbelievable. And any economist who would have looked at the data in the 60s would have thought that Mauritius was a basket case and would remain a basket case. They were
a basket case.
Basket case means they will always be with their begging bowl going to other countries or to institutions.
Were we at the time known as that begging bowl?
Yeah. I think if I have to characterize Mauritius in the 60s, in the early years of independence, it was basically a begging bowl country. And if you talk to people who were involved in those days, in the early 70s, they will tell you how, when they go to the IMF and World Bank at the meetings there and so on, they go there basically to try and get money, as much as possible, to finance development. And it was not only at these institutions, but also from friendly countries.
There's a program at the time that the World Bank, the IMF, initiated as known as the Structural Adjustment Program. And I think that dates back right from the early 80s. I think that's the time when you were a student in Canada. What can you tell us about this program? Was it an important program?
Oh yeah, it was quite important because Mauritius was almost bankrupt at that time. We had only maybe about 2 weeks of official reserves, and unemployment was high. All the macroeconomic fundamentals were basically in the red. There were a few countries that were in a similar situation. One of them, I think, was Tanzania. Was in quite a similar situation as Mauritius. And I remember that year very well because that was the year I took my first job as a lecturer at the University of Manitoba. There was a professor who was working there. He was also working at the IMF, and the IMF called him and told him that Tanzania didn't want to accept the structural adjustment program and that he had to go back to the IMF and and look at the issue. That's when I got my first job. I replaced him at the University of Manitoba. So I remember that well. And it appears also that Tanzania took a lot longer time to come out of their problems than Mauritius. Mauritius has accepted the structural adjustment program, so the IMF told them what to do under certain conditions and so on. And it worked for Mauritius. There was a few years of sacrifice that people had to go through because things probably got worse before getting better, but they eventually got better.
Okay. But and when you were back in Mauritius, working at the ministry, and witnessing what was happening, the good things that were happening, what was the link then with what had already happened with regards to Mauritius adhering to the program, to that structural adjustment program?
Oh yeah, I thought it was the right decision that Mauritius took. Tanzania, Nyerere refused to do it, but they took a longer time to put the economy back on the rail. Mauritius, it took a while, but it succeeded because the people had to sacrifice and they accepted it.
For the purpose of our viewers, can you explain what the program is?
The program was basically about strengthening the macroeconomic fundamentals. Like you have chronic trade deficit, chronic current account deficit. So because of that, you have to devalue your currency and so on. And then these deficits lead to further deficits, budget deficits, and so on and so forth. And you don't get people don't want to invest in the country because there's no hope, there's no future, and so on. But once you start the program, once you start making the sacrifice, people start having confidence that things are changing, things are improving, especially investors start having confidence. And at the same time, there were other things happening like foreign investors, the textile industry, tourism sector, and so on were developing. But at some stage at that time, there was a lack of foreign currency in the country. And when you don't have foreign capital, it's difficult to invest because Mauritius has to import most of the equipment, raw materials, and so on and so forth. So if you don't have foreign exchange, it became very difficult. So IMF was helping with all that. And we accepted. But at the same time, there were certain conditions that they imposed on the government. Not all the conditions were accepted, actually, because one of the conditions was to tighten the welfare state, which I don't think the Prime Minister at that time accepted.
As senior economist back then, when we look at how the basic retirement pension has constantly being on the rise, which was clearly overdue, goes in line with what you're saying.
You see, in Mauritius, we have to be very careful not to dismantle the welfare state. And I think most of our leaders in the past have done everything they can to avoid dismantling the welfare state. One of the reasons is that because we still have lots of people struggling in this country. The richest 20% of the people in this country makes more than 50% of the GDP and probably owns more than 80% of the wealth. Yeah. So what do the rest do if they're not supported by government? If we go according to some advice that has been given in the past to make the education system payable and healthcare payable, people won't be able to afford, especially when they were earning 3,000 to 5,000 rupees per month at work. So the welfare state has been important element as a package, so that even though people are making 3,000 to 5,000 rupees per month, they are getting all the support they need from government so they can live a fairly comfortable life. Now, if we say we dismantle the welfare state, then we have to make sure that they don't go to work for 5,000, but they go to work for 20, 25,000 rupees per month to be able to maintain the same. So it's not time yet to review the welfare state. We must continue to improve it. And I think increasing the BRP and so on, and even establishing the minimum wage was long overdue.
How did you go about, dealing with the World Bank, the IMF, Moody's? What was the relationship and how did that work?
Well, at the beginning, I was not dealing with them. But over the years, later on, I would accompany the minister and the top officials who were going to the World Bank for its annual meeting. The World Bank has annual meeting in sometimes in April, and then another one around October. So I was going with them, and there, you see, I was lucky. I didn't know the hard times, because some people tell me when times were hard, the discussions were different because they were actually going to get help from the IMF and World Bank. But I was one of the lucky ones. When we went there, we didn't want their help. We didn't need their help. So we were discussing other things. And it was quite interesting because both the World Bank and the IMF, they will do their homework before meeting us. So they knew a lot about the country, how it was doing, how every sector was doing, and so on and so forth. So we learned a lot from them. But we never had any obligation. Also, I have the feeling that when the IMF and World Bank were meeting with us, it's just because they had to meet with us. It's not.
Okay. I want to ask you a question about the Monetary Policy Committee. It was enacted in 2005?
2004.
And put into practice in 2007. Having come back in the country in 89 and only seeing this take place as late as 2004, 2007, how did things work? And what brought about the very situation of then having a monetary policy committee?
When I came to Mauritius in 1989, I was a bit shocked to see that the interest rate was announced in the budget speech. It was quite abnormal even in the 80s for any country to do that. Usually it's the central bank. For those countries that have a central bank, it's for the central bank to decide on the interest rate, and it's for the central bank to announce the policy rate, not for the Ministry of Finance. So I found that very strange. So a couple of years later, I kind of influenced the Ministry of Finance to set up a monetary policy committee. I thought you needed a committee to sit down and thrash out the issues before deciding on interest rate. It was done, but the Monetary Policy Committee was set up at the Ministry of Finance and chaired by the Minister of Finance. That was also a bit, it was not exactly what I had in mind, but it was a start. Then there was a change in minister, and the next minister decided not to have the Monetary Policy Committee at the Ministry of Finance and sent it back to the Bank of Mauritius. And I don't know what the Bank of Mauritius did, whether they had an internal monetary policy and so on. But in 2004, I kind of convinced the Minister of Finance to put it in the law that Mauritius will have a monetary policy committee at the central bank. And it was done in the Bank Act 2004, Bank of Mauritius Act. Then in 2007, the Monetary Policy Committee was set up. And I have been on the Monetary Policy Committee since then until April last year, when I decided to leave the MPC, because I've been there for so many years. I thought it was time to go. But I was not there as representative of Ministry of Finance. You see, I was there at the beginning as an observer, because we based our law on the UK and the New Zealand law. In the UK, the Treasury has an observer on the monetary policy. So just go there and observe and doesn't discuss and so on. But then I think it was in 2015 when the minister decided that I should become a member. So I said, okay, if the minister decides, you cannot refuse. So I accepted to be a member, but not representative of Ministry of Finance. There's nothing in the law that says that the Ministry of Finance should have a representative on the MPC. So it was in my own capacity.
Another interesting element, which is Mauritius being seen as a high income country. A few years back, we climbed up the ladder to become a high income country and a high income economy. COVID, unfortunately, dragged us back down to being an upper middle economy. We are slowly going back to becoming a high income economy. What I want to ask you with regards to that is, do you think being a small island development state, we can afford to we can sustain being a high income economy? Because with that comes the act of not having to rely on the preferential agreements, things like AGWA, the EU agreements with regards to fisheries and textiles. Can we sustain being a high-income economy?
Oh, yeah. You see, let me tell you the story from the beginning. There was one year in the budget when we announced that Mauritius will be a 1 trillion rupee economy in the 2020s. By the end of the 2020s. There was just saying that we will become a high-income economy. Then I think in the 2014 budget, it was announced that Mauritius will become a high-income economy within the next 6 budgets. So it was already predicted that, which means that it was meant to be in 2020. Actually, the announcement was made in 2020, but we got there in 2019. And that high income is basically based on an Atlas method developed by the World Bank. And when we used the Atlas equation, it was evident for me back in 2014 that we will become a high-income economy because our growth rate was higher than the benchmark used by the World Bank. So I said, as long as we are higher, we will catch up. And we predicted that it will be by 2020. We got there by 2019, which is fair enough. But we have to be careful with what is meant by high-income economy. We can be a high-income economy, but not an advanced economy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you see, Singapore is a high-income but also advanced economy. It's a first world country. In Mauritius, we can have high income, but not fairly well distributed. All the sectors are not well developed. There are problems with inclusiveness and so on and so forth. There's marginalization in the society. So you don't enjoy the same quality of life. We can be in the same league as the US, but we don't have the same quality of life as in the US or in Singapore, and so on and so forth. But that's also quite subjective sometimes too. So we can still go back. I think we may be able to go back. It will take a longer time, though.
But can we sustain being that? When we
Yeah,
look at the agreements that we have,
yeah. I think after 50 years of independence, Mauritius has to grow out of that mentality of depending on preferential access to markets and begging bowls and so on and so forth. If we don't do that, then why did we have 50 years of development, of trying to get out of those difficult times and so on?
but Doctor, have we reached that time, or are we nearly there?
Oh yeah, we've lost preferential access for sugar. We've lost preferential access for textiles. These are the two main industries that were, driving economic growth. That is why 2006 budget was all about reforms, to say, okay, stop relying on preferential access. We move to a new economic paradigm, focus on global competitiveness.
And whilst this is happening, we have a new world economic order. We have the new economic strong powerhouses like China and India coming into play. What do you think the impact is on the more traditional Europe and US?
Well, obviously the economic power is shifting. It probably has already shifted, because when we look at the top 5 countries in the world in terms of GDP, 3 of them are from Asia: Japan, China, and India. And China is going to be the first, or is already the first. India plans in some 50 years to be the first. So probably the top 3 countries in the world in terms of economic power will be from Asia. This is very positive for Mauritius, provided we adapt, provided we seize the opportunities, because we have excellent relations with India, with China, and we already have the European market. We are very Eurocentric, which is a risk, but we've lived on it for years. Eurocentric in the sense that 65% of our exports go to Europe. About 65% of our tourists come from Europe. So we're very Eurocentric. We've been trying to diversify, but we don't, at the same time, we don't want to lose the European market. Now with India and China, and plus we have signed the SECPA and free trade area with China.
Are we maximizing those agreements, do you think?
Well, I don't want to assess that, but it's there for us to maximize.
Small island development states like us are subject to, to climate change. Last year in BIZWEEK, you wrote 2 papers with regards to our strong reliance on imports. How do we move away from this reliance?
We are suffering again from our success, basically, because our per capita income has gone up so fast that we are able to buy things from outside. And we've opened up the country. We've complied with globalization, and which means that we say, okay, whatever is cheaper. If I'm going to buy something, I'll go for the cheapest. Whether it comes from outside or not, it doesn't matter. Okay, as long as it's affordable and it has a good price quality ratio. But then, having done that for years, we've come to rely almost totally on imports for food, for 100% of our food. We are 100% dependent on imports for energy. They're saying 85%, but it has gone down.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well,
How are we dependent on energy?
well, to produce our electricity, we're using fossil fuel, which is all imported. Now they are talking about biomass and so on and so forth, which is fine. But
we've been using biomass for.
Yeah, we've been using, but still, if we don't get coal and so on, it's a mix. If you don't get the inputs from outside, biomass will not be enough, I suppose, to produce the electricity you need. So I think if you cannot import for whatever reason, that was the whole point behind the paper I wrote for food security. I said we needed a food autonomy revolution.
What do you mean by that?
By that I mean that we have to be able to produce at least 30% of our food without importing anything, without relying on any import, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's seeds, whether it's animal feed or energy. Okay.
Versus being roughly what percentage now?
Well, now it's 100% imported. 100%. If tomorrow, I'll take the extreme case, the worst scenario, if tomorrow ships and planes don't come to Mauritius for whatever reason, and it's something we cannot rule out, the way the geopolitics is developing, if that happens, we won't have food. We simply won't have food in Mauritius. That was the whole point of the paper. Now, why cannot Mauritius go for greater food security? Singapore is doing it. Singapore has all the money it needs to buy food from outside, and it has only 1% of its land that can be used as agricultural land. Mauritius has more than 40% land to use for agriculture. There's a food crisis in almost every country right now, whether it's prices or availability and so on and so forth, climate change and so on. There's an opportunity for Mauritius to produce for export. And once we develop the capacity to export food, means we have the capacity to produce for ourselves too.
Okay.
So that's there are opportunities to seize, but if we leave it to the market, it won't happen. A deep thinking about what we should do about this industry. Now, people growing sugar, they are saying, okay, it keeps the country green, you can have biomass from it and so on and so forth. But, do we have to produce sugarcane to have biomass? Or can we produce something else? So we have to do some deep thinking about all that. For how long will government subsidize the cane industry? For how long will the cane industry exist, use more than 40% of the land to produce less than 3% of GDP? For how long the sugarcane industry will exist to use more than 30% of our water and produce less than 3% of GDP. And we are spending billions and billions of dollars on water for both consumption and irrigation. So, we need to do some deep thinking. And obviously, it's a very passionate issue. And some people think that they cannot see a Mauritius without sugarcane. But is there another way?
Now, being at the age of tech, generative AI, what do you think about, what is your view going forward for Mauritius to tap into the direction industries are taking?
I think we have to read about where the world is going, adapt as much as possible. But then adapting also means that you have the capacity to do so. Right now, I feel that there's a disconnect. Before, why did we succeed? Before, we didn't need that much skills. We were getting into low skills, textile production and so on. You could train some of your people for the tourism sector. So we were not looking for very high skills. Now we are. Almost all the sectors we are going in, the new sectors, require high skills. This is why we have had a skills mismatch on the labor market for the past 20, 25 years. We have not been able to resolve the skills mismatch on the market. And that's the source of the unemployment in the market. We have about 35,000 expatriates working in the country and about 45,000 people without jobs. But it's mostly because of skills mismatch. So we don't have the skills go further. And we kind of think that we will be able to import labor. This is another area where we need import substitution. Some 7 billion rupees are expatriated every year by expatriate workers, are sent abroad. So it's very costly, and we are not developing our people's skills to go into these new areas. The education profile of the labor force is not what can take us to this ambitious thing about AI and data technology and so on and so forth, because Mauritius...
that is the international trend. And if I go back to what you said earlier with regards to Mauritius, always following very well.
Yeah,
what
we
international trends are.
have to adapt to these trends, but do we have the capacity to adapt? That's my point. When you look at the cohort that goes into pre-primary school today, how many of them actually end up at the university? Very, very few. You cannot develop a country, have the ambition to go high-tech, AI, and fintech, and so on and so forth, with so few people graduating. The only way you can do it is to go the Dubai model and so on and so forth and get lots of people from outside. But they can afford it, and I don't know if we can. So we need a fundamental and very quick reform in our education system and training system to prepare our workforce for the economy of the future.
We're coming towards the end of Conversations Live. But before we end, 30 years at the Ministry of Finance, roughly?
Yeah, roughly.
2024. Any key moments you can recollect to share with us?
Well, at first when I joined the ministry, people were congratulating me because I think the minister then, because I joined, if I can name maybe 1989, it was Vishnu Lakshmi Naidu. He had a good reputation of selecting the right advisors and so on and so forth. So I enjoyed that, you know, because then I convinced myself that I didn't take the wrong decision. Then when I joined the Prime Minister's office, it was, you know, an experience I never thought I would live as an economist, because when you're an economist, you want to advise at the highest level. And I had the opportunity to do that. And we had a very good team. I enjoyed the work very much. It was very productive. We did a lot of economic diplomacy during these years. And I was there, you know. I didn't do it myself, but I was there in the team and experienced everything. Then I think when I came back at the Ministry of Finance in 2003, I worked on the 2004 and 2005 budgets. These were the time I liked the most.
And why? Why 2004, 2005? What was special?
Well, you see, when I was working on the 2004 budget, I realized that we needed to put the emphasis on social development more than economic growth. For many years, we put the emphasis on growth, and growth has been delivering, you know, a kind of gap between the rich and the poor has been widening, and so on. So we've gone from a situation where there was a happiness in the country, you know, people were happy, to a situation where we were getting higher growth, but people became unhappy. So the whole thing had to be shifted on social. I also realized at the same time, in that year, when I was discussing what we were going to do in the budget, in that year, the government in India, in spite of shining India, lost the election because people were seeing growth but were not benefiting from it.
Yeah.
So in 2004 and 2005, we tried to correct that and put more emphasis on social development. And you would probably notice that in most of the budget speeches now, we will talk about economic growth, social development, and then the environment. These three terms, they're kind of integrated in the development approach. The corporate sector calls it the triple bottom line approach, where I think government has to take the same approach. And I think we started that in 2004.
Last question is, what are you doing with your life these days after so many years at the Ministry of Finance? How do you spend your days?
By conversation. And I'm also working with the private sector in a very informal way, just to keep busy. But I enjoy getting up in the morning and, you know, dealing with life on my own terms. I mean, it's an opportunity that probably after retirement that you experience, and I wanted to experience it, and I'm doing it. So I kind of decide what to do every day that I wake up. It's different, and I enjoy doing the simple things in life. One friend told me, you know, to enjoy the simple things in life the way you're enjoying it, you have to be very rich. You know, I said, you know, I mean, simple things.
Rich in the pocket or rich in the mind?
I guess both. You know, I enjoy getting up in the morning and listening to the birds before I get up in the morning and, you know, get ready to go to work. And now I have more time for these other things. But it's very difficult not to keep your mind busy. So we'll see.
Dr. Narrainen, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for coming to Conversations Live, and lovely chat with you.
Thank you very much.